The night had settled into a comfortable stillness around Keith's apartment. Through his slightly parted window, the sounds of the city had faded to a distant hum, punctuated occasionally by the soft patter of rain beginning to fall. Keith sat in his living room, a book open on his lap, though his eyes had drifted from the pages to stare absently at the wall. Another day had come and gone, indistinguishable from the ones before it. Work, commute, dinner alone, and now this moment of quiet before sleep claimed him. His apartment was small but tidy, decorated sparsely with a few framed photographs and secondhand furniture that spoke of practicality rather than style. The lamp beside him cast a warm, yellow glow that pushed back against the darkness, creating a small island of light. Keith had grown accustomed to these solitary evenings, finding a certain peace in the predictable rhythm of his life, though sometimes he couldn't help but feel the weight of emptiness pressing in around him. He was just about to close his book when a sound broke the silence, a gentle knocking at his door, so soft that he almost mistook it for the tapping of rain against his window. Keith frowned, glancing at the clock on his wall. It was nearly midnight, far too late for casual visitors, especially on a weeknight. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but the knocking came again, a touch more insistent this time, yet still restrained. With a sigh, Keith set his book aside and rose from his chair. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole, but what he saw only confused him more. A figure stood in the dimly lit hallway, but the distorted view made it difficult to discern any clear details. Hesitantly, he opened the door, keeping the security chain latched. "Yes?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of wariness. What, or rather, who, stood before him stole the breath from his lungs. A woman, or at least a being with a feminine form, gazed back at him with eyes unlike any he had ever seen. They were large and luminous, the irises a shifting kaleidoscope of colors that seemed to contain entire nebulae within them. Her skin was pale with an iridescent quality, almost translucent in places, revealing delicate patterns beneath that pulsed subtly like gentle currents. Her features were humanoid but refined to an otherworldly perfection. High cheekbones, a slender nose, and lips that held the faintest blue tint. Her hair, if it could be called that, fell in silken strands that seemed to absorb and refract light simultaneously, creating a corona effect around her face. She wore simple clothing, a loose-fitting tunic of some material Keith couldn't identify, neither fabric nor plastic, but something in between that draped over her slender frame with unusual fluidity. Most striking of all was her expression, a mixture of exhaustion and undisguised vulnerability that transcended any physical differences. There was a sadness in those cosmic eyes, a weariness that seemed to reach beyond mere physical fatigue. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, Keith frozen in disbelief, the stranger regarding him with an intensity that felt almost like recognition. Then she spoke, her voice soft and melodious with an accent he couldn't place, each word carefully formed as if English was not her native tongue. "May I sleep beside you tonight, human?" Keith felt his grip tighten on the door, certain now that he was dreaming or hallucinating. The question was so unexpected, so bizarre, that his mind struggled to process it. He looked past her into the empty hallway, half expecting to see camera crews or laughing friends, some explanation for this surreal encounter. But there was no one else. "I'm sorry, what?" he managed, his voice cracking slightly. The being swayed slightly, fatigue evident in her posture. "I require rest. Safety." She paused, seeming to search for words. "Your dwelling radiates peace. You radiate peace. I am not dangerous." Her hand lifted in what appeared to be a gesture of reassurance, but it trembled visibly. Keith's mind raced through possible explanations. An elaborate prank, a confused cosplayer, someone with mental health issues, or maybe, and this thought both terrified and exhilarated him, something genuinely not of this world. Every logical part of him screamed to close the door, to call someone, to retreat to the safety of normalcy. Yet he couldn't ignore the genuine distress in her eyes, a language of pain he understood regardless of her otherworldly appearance. "Who are you?" he asked, still not unlatching the chain. "Where did you come from?" "Lyra," she replied, placing a hand delicately over her chest. "I am called Lyra. I come from far." She gestured vaguely upward, confirming Keith's most fantastic suspicion. "I cannot explain fully now. I am." She swayed again, more dramatically this time, her hand reaching out to steady herself against the doorframe. Keith's compassion warred. With his caution, "Are you hurt? Do you need a hospital?" Lyra shook her head quickly, something like fear flashing across her features. "No human institutions. They would not understand. I need only rest, safety, warmth." Her voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "Please, I will leave at first light." There was something in her plea that resonated with a loneliness Keith knew all too well. Against every rational thought, he found himself unlatching the chain and opening the door wider. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "But I don't understand why me, why here." Lyra entered with careful, measured steps. "Your energy is kind, quiet, not chaotic like many others." She stood just inside the doorway, looking small and out of place amidst his ordinary furnishings. "Thank you." Keith closed the door, his heart pounding in his chest as the reality of what he'd just done began to sink in. He had invited a stranger, possibly an alien being, into his home based on nothing but a gut feeling and a face full of sorrow. "I can sleep here," Lyra said, gesturing to his couch. "Are you hungry? Thirsty?" Keith asked, falling back on hospitality in the absence of any protocol for the situation. Lyra considered this. Water would be acceptable. Keith nodded and moved to the kitchen, grateful for the momentary reprieve to collect his thoughts. As he filled a glass from the tap, he watched Lyra from the corner of his eye. She moved about his living room with cautious curiosity, her fingers hovering over surfaces as if afraid to make contact. When she finally did touch the fabric of his couch, her expression transformed into one of surprise and pleasure. "Soft," she murmured, pressing her palm against it. "Different texture than anticipated." Keith returned with the water, which she accepted with both hands, examining the clear liquid with fascination before taking a small, careful sip. He noticed that her hands had an extra joint in each finger, subtle but undeniable once noticed. "So," Keith began, sitting in the armchair across from her, maintaining a safe distance. "You're not from Earth, are you?" Lyra lowered the glass, meeting his gaze directly. "No. Simple, unembellished truth. And you need to sleep beside me? Not just in my apartment, but actually next to me?" Keith clarified, still struggling with the most perplexing part of her request. She nodded. "My species does not sleep as humans do, but we require energy restoration cycles. These are safer, more efficient when in proximity to another being whose energy is compatible." She placed the glass down carefully. "Your presence stabilizes me. I cannot explain better in your language." Keith ran a hand through his hair, trying to absorb what she was saying. "And there's no one else? No other people like you around?" A flash of pain crossed her features. "I'm alone here." It was not intended. The raw honesty in her voice pierced through Keith's remaining skepticism. Whether her story was true or not, her distress certainly was. He found himself nodding. "Okay, you can stay the night. I have a queen-size bed. It's big enough that we can both have space." Relief washed over Lyra's face, softening her features. "Thank you, Keith." He started, not remembering having told her his name, but decided that was a question for another time. Instead, he led the way to his bedroom, suddenly acutely aware of its lived-in state. A few clothes draped over a chair, bed unmade, a stack of books on the nightstand. It wasn't messy, exactly, but it was private, and now he was bringing a stranger into this most personal space. "This is where I sleep," he said unnecessarily, gesturing to the bed. "Do you need, pajamas or anything?" Lyra shook her head. "This covering is sufficient." She approached the bed with the same careful curiosity she'd shown toward his couch, pressing a hand against the mattress, feeling the give of the memory foam beneath her touch. What is this material? It yields but returns. Memory foam, Keith explained, finding some comfort in discussing the mundane. It adapts to your body's shape. Lyra nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Intelligent design. Efficient. An awkward silence fell between them. Keith cleared his throat. So, I usually sleep on the left side, if that's okay? Any position is acceptable, Lyra replied, still studying the bed. Keith pulled back the covers on the right side for her. These are blankets. For warmth and comfort, he explained, feeling slightly ridiculous for narrating such basic things. Lyra approached and tentatively sat on the edge of the bed. Your dwelling maintains artificial warmth already. Why additional coverings? Comfort, mostly, Keith said. It feels nice to be wrapped up sometimes. Secure. Lyra considered this, then carefully swung her legs onto the bed and lay down, her movements precise and deliberate. She remained stiff, lying flat on her back with her hands at her sides. You can get comfortable, Keith encouraged. However you normally rest. She turned her head to look at him. This is unfamiliar territory. I do not wish to encroach on your space. It's okay, Keith said softly, surprised by his own calm. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a strange fascination. Make yourself comfortable. Lyra shifted slightly, adjusting her position until she was lying on her side, facing toward where Keith would be. Her movements had a fluid quality that reminded him that whatever she wasn't human. Keith moved to the bathroom to brush his teeth and change into his sleep clothes, a simple t-shirt and sweatpants. He caught his reflection in the mirror and almost laughed at how normal he looked, given the extraordinary circumstances. There's an alien in your bed, he whispered to himself, half expecting to wake up from what had to be an elaborate dream. When he returned, Lyra was in the same position, watching him with those incredible eyes that seemed to see through him rather than at him. Keith climbed into his side of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. He reached over to switch off the lamp, then hesitated. Do you prefer light or darkness for resting? Darkness is preferable, Lyra responded, though I can adapt to either. Keith nodded and switched off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness broken only by the faint glow of the city seeping through his curtains. In the dim light, he could see that Lyra's skin had a subtle luminescence of its own, barely perceptible but definitely there. They lay in silence, Keith hyper-aware of her presence just inches away. The situation was so bizarre that he couldn't even begin to process it. He had 1,000 questions burning in his mind, but something told him to wait, to give her the space and rest she so clearly needed. Thank you, Lyra's voice came softly through the darkness, for trusting without understanding. I don't know if it's trust or insanity, Keith replied honestly, but you didn't seem dangerous. Perceptive, she said, and he thought he detected a hint of amusement in her voice. Rest now, Keith. You're safe as well. Strangely comforted by her words, Keith closed his eyes, certain he wouldn't sleep a wink with an alien being beside him. Yet, to his surprise, a profound sense of peace washed over him, as if Lyra was somehow projecting calm into the space between them. The last thing he remembered before drifting off was the faint, pleasant scent that reminded him of rain and something else he couldn't quite name, something not of this earth. Hours later, Keith stirred from a surprisingly deep sleep, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar presence beside him. Memory returned in a rush as he saw Lyra, still lying on her side, her cosmic eyes open and watching him with a gentle intensity. Did you rest? He asked, his voice rough with sleep. Yes, she replied. Your proximity was helpful. Keith sat up slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle her. In the filtered moonlight, her features seemed softer, less alien, though no less extraordinary. Can I get you anything? More water. Lyra shook her head slightly. I am sufficiently hydrated. She paused, then added, Your kindness is unexpected. Humans have a reputation for fear of the unknown. Keith couldn't argue with that assessment. I think I'm still in shock, he admitted. Or maybe I'm choosing to believe this is a very elaborate dream. Not a dream, Lyra said, sitting up as well. though I understand the comfort in such a belief. An awkward silence fell between them again. Keith glanced at his alarm clock, 3:24 a.m. The witching hour, a time when reality itself seemed thinner somehow, making this surreal encounter feel strangely appropriate. "May I ask you something?" Keith ventured. Lyra inclined her head in what appeared to be a gesture of assent. "Where exactly are you from?" "What planet, I guess?" Lyra's expression grew thoughtful. "Your language lacks the words for proper explanation. Your astronomers have not named it. It orbits what you would call a binary star system beyond your Pleiades cluster. And you came here in a spaceship?" Keith asked, feeling simultaneously childish and appropriately curious given the circumstances. A shadow passed over Lyra's features. "Yes, though that vessel is no longer functional." She looked down at her hands, which were clasped loosely in her lap. "I did not intend to remain on Earth. There was a miscalculation." Keith sensed her distress and changed direction. "What brought you to Earth in the first place?" "Curiosity," Lyra said, looking up again. "My kind are explorers, catalogers of life forms and environments. Earth is," she paused, searching for words, "remarkably diverse, biologically complex, emotionally intense." "Emotionally intense?" Keith repeated. "Humans feel," loudly, Lyra explained. "Your emotions create energy patterns that are highly perceptible to my kind. Most humans project a chaotic mix: fear, desire, anger, joy, all tangled together." Her eyes met his. "Your pattern is different. Calmer. There is sadness, yes, and loneliness, but not the frenetic energy I sense in others." Keith felt strangely exposed, as if she had just read his diary. "You can feel what I'm feeling?" "Not specifically," Lyra clarified. "Y senza patterns, intensitias." "The shape of your emotional state, not the content." Keith nodded slowly, processing this. "And that's why you came to my door?" "Because I felt calm to you." "Partly," Lyra acknowledged. "Also because your dwelling was accessible and isolated enough for safety." A small, almost human smile touched her lips. "And perhaps there was intuition involved. What you might call a gut feeling." Something about that statement, so unexpectedly human, broke the tension. Keith found himself smiling back. "I get those too. Like when I decided to let a stranger from another planet into my apartment in the middle of the night." Lyra's smile widened slightly. "A fortunate instinct for me." Feeling emboldened by this small connection, Keith shifted to face her more directly. "What happened to your ship? Is there any way to repair it?" The smile faded from Lyra's face. "It was damaged entering your atmosphere. A fault in the shielding mechanism." She shook her head. "The technology required for repairs does not exist on Earth. And my kind, they believe I perished in the crash. There will be no rescue." The stark reality of her situation hit Keith with unexpected force. "So you're stranded here? Permanently?" "Yes," Lyra said simply, though the word carried the weight of countless lost stars. "I'm sorry," Keith said inadequately. "That must be terrifying." Lyra's gaze turned distant. "It has been difficult to adjust. Your world is beautiful but harsh in many ways. The emotional noise alone is—" She made a gesture with her hand that suggested overwhelming chaos. "Is that why you needed to sleep beside me? To escape that noise?" "Yes," Lyra confirmed. "Your pattern creates a buffer zone of sorts. It allows me to enter restoration cycles properly without being disrupted by the constant bombardment of human emotional output." Keith considered this. "How long have you been on Earth?" 87 of your days," Lyra answered precisely. "And where have you been staying all this time?" A flicker of discomfort crossed her features. "Various locations. Abandoned structures primarily. Moving frequently to avoid detection." The image of this extraordinary being hiding in abandoned buildings, alone and afraid on a foreign planet, struck Keith as profoundly sad. "That sounds lonely," he said softly. Lyra met his gaze with unexpected intensity. "Loneliness is another point of commonality between our species, it seems." The observation caught Keith off guard. He wasn't accustomed to having his emotional state so accurately named by others, let alone by someone who had known him for only a few hours. I wouldn't say I'm lonely, he protested automatically. I'm independent. I like my space. There is difference between chosen solitude and isolation, Lyra said gently. Your pattern suggests both. Keith fell silent, uncomfortable with how easily she had seen through him. To deflect, he asked, don't you have people you miss? Family or whatever the equivalent is for your kind. It was Lyra's turn to look away. My unit, what you might call family. They are scientists, explorers like myself. They would understand the risks of my mission. Her voice softened. But yes, there is absence. Connections severed. In that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. No longer were they merely an alien and a human sharing space out of necessity. They were two beings sharing a universal experience of loss and disconnection, separated by physiology but united by sentiment. I know what that's like, Keith admitted, surprising himself with his candor. I moved to this city 5 years ago for work. Left everyone I knew behind. Told myself I'd make new connections, build a new life here. He gave a rueful smile. Turns out that's harder than it sounds when you spend most of your time working or recovering from work. What is your work? Lyra asked, seeming genuinely interested. Graphic design. I create visuals for companies, advertisements, websites. It's creative in theory, but often ends up being very technical and solitary in practice. Keith shrugged. It pays the bills. You create visual communication, Lyra summarized. That has value, I suppose, though sometimes it feels like I'm just adding to the noise of consumerism. Keith hadn't articulated this thought to anyone before. What about you? What's your role in your society? I am a xenobiologist, Lyra said. I study life forms different from my own. Document their behaviors, their adaptations, their societies. Keith smiled. So right now, you're basically doing your job with me. Lyra's expression brightened. I had not considered that perspective. Yes, this interaction would constitute valuable research data. Glad to be of service to intergalactic science, Keith said with a small laugh. The absurdity of the situation was starting to feel strangely normal. Lyra tilted her head, studying him. You have adapted quickly to my presence. Most humans would remain in a state of fear or disbelief. Keith considered this. I think a part of me is still in disbelief. But also, I've always hoped we weren't alone in the universe. It seems statistically unlikely that Earth was the only planet with intelligent life. He paused. Though I never expected to have an alien sleeping in my bed. Is my presence here uncomfortable for you? Lyra asked with genuine concern. Not uncomfortable, exactly. Just unexpected. Keith found himself smiling again. Actually, this is the most interesting thing that's happened to me in years. I am pleased to provide novelty, Lyra said, and Keith detected a hint of dry humor in her tone. They fell into a more comfortable silence, the initial awkwardness between them dissolving in the quiet honesty of their exchange. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the faint sounds of the city had diminished to near-complete silence. In this bubble of calm, the boundaries of normal reality seemed to blur around the edges. In my culture, Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence, to share rest space is an act of profound trust, more significant than many other forms of connection. In human culture, too, actually, Keith responded. Letting someone into your bedroom, your bed, it's usually reserved for those you're very close to. Yet you extended this trust to a stranger, Lyra observed. An alien stranger. Keith thought about this. I guess I did. Maybe I'm not as cautious as I should be. Or perhaps you recognized something familiar despite the unfamiliar exterior, Lyra suggested. Their eyes met again, and Keith was struck by how quickly he had adjusted to her alien features. What had seemed so jarring only hours before now held a strange beauty, a complexity that fascinated rather than frightened him. May I? Lyra began, then hesitated. Would it be acceptable if I moved closer? The restorative effect increases with proximity. Keith felt a flutter of nervousness, but nodded. Sure, that's okay. With careful, deliberate movements, Lyra shifted across the bed until she was lying just inches away from him. The subtle luminescence of her skin cast a gentle glow between them. Keith could now see the intricate patterns beneath her skin more clearly, flowing designs that pulsed with a rhythm he suspected matched whatever passed for a heartbeat in her physiology. "Is this acceptable?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Keith said, surprised to find he meant it. There was something comforting about her nearness, as if her presence filled a space in the room that had always been empty. Almost without thinking, Keith extended his hand, palm up, into the small space between them, an offering of connection without demand. Lyra looked at it for a long moment, then slowly, with infinite care, placed her hand in his. The touch was electric, not in a romantic sense, but in a way that felt fundamentally altering. Her skin was smoother than human skin, with a subtle temperature that was neither warm nor cool, but somehow both at once. The extra joint in her fingers allowed them to curl around his hand in a way that was different, but not unpleasant. Most striking was the faint vibration he could feel, like a gentle current passing between them. "Oh," Keith breathed, not sure what else to say. "You feel it," Lyra observed, watching his face. "The energy exchange. Is that what that is? It's like a humming." "Your species has limited sensitivity to energy fields," Lyra explained, "but in moments of connection, some awareness is possible." They remained like that, hands joined in the space between their bodies, neither pulling away. The simple touch felt profound in its innocence, a bridge across galaxies of difference. "Thank you," Lyra said suddenly, her voice thick with emotion Keith couldn't name. "Not just for shelter or safety. For seeing me as a being worthy of kindness." Keith felt a lump form in his throat. "Of course you're worthy of kindness. Everyone is. Many on your planet would disagree," Lyra said softly. "I have observed enough to know that difference is often met with fear or hostility here." "I can't deny that," Keith acknowledged sadly. "Humans often fear what they don't understand. We have a long history of treating even other humans poorly because of differences much smaller than yours." "Yet you did not react with fear," Lyra noted. Keith thought about this. "Maybe I was too surprised to be afraid. Or maybe," he paused, considering, "maybe I recognized something in you that needed help, and that was more important than whatever differences exist between us." Lyra's eyes seemed to shine more brightly. "That capacity for empathy across boundaries is one of your species' most remarkable traits, though not universally expressed." "We're complicated," Keith said with a small smile. "Contradictory, capable of both incredible kindness and terrible cruelty. As our most sentient species," Lyra assured him. "The capacity for both creation and destruction seems to be a universal constant." He found himself wondering about her world, her people, the society she had left behind. There were so many questions he wanted to ask, so much he wanted to know, but he sensed that now was not the time for an interrogation. Instead, he simply enjoyed the peaceful connection that had formed between them, unexpected and precious in its uniqueness. Lyra's hand tightened slightly around his. "Your energy pattern is changing," she observed. "Becoming more relaxed, harmonious." "I feel it," Keith admitted. "It's like a weight is lifting. I can't explain it." "No need for explanation," Lyra said. "Simply experience." They fell silent again, but it was a rich silence, full of unspoken understanding. Keith felt his eyelids growing heavy again, a profound sense of peace washing over him. He wondered if Lyra was somehow influencing his emotional state, but found he didn't mind if she was. The feeling was too pleasant, too healing to resist. "You should complete your sleep cycle," Lyra said gently. "Humans require consistent rest patterns." "What about you?" Keith asked drowsily. "Will you rest more too?" "I will enter a meditative restoration state," she replied. "Similar to your sleep, but with different neurological patterns." Keith nodded, his eyes already closing. "Good night, Lyra," he murmured. "Rest well, Keith," came her soft reply. As sleep reclaimed him, Keith felt Lyra shift slightly closer, their joined hands serving as an anchor between two worlds. His last conscious thought was a mixture of wonder and gratitude. Wonder at the incredible turn his ordinary life had taken, and gratitude that of all the doors in all the cities on earth, she had knocked on his. Sometime later, Keith drifted into consciousness gradually, aware first of a gentle warmth beside him and the soft sound of rhythmic breathing that was not his own. Memory returned slowly, then all at once. The knock at his door, the otherworldly visitor, their midnight conversation. His eyes opened to find early morning light filtering through his curtains, casting the room in a soft golden glow. Lyra lay beside him, their hands still loosely intertwined, in sleep or whatever state of rest she had entered. Her features looked even more peaceful, the subtle luminescence of her skin now barely visible in the morning light. Keith found himself studying her face, marveling at the perfect blend of the familiar and the alien. She looked almost human, yet unmistakably not, each difference a reminder of the vast distance she had traveled to reach this moment, this bed, this connection. As if sensing his gaze, Lyra's eyes opened, those cosmic irises adjusting to the light. For a moment, she seemed disoriented. Then recognition dawned, and she offered him a small smile. "Good morning," Keith said softly. "Morning greetings," she replied, her voice melodious in the quiet room. Neither made any move to separate their hands, the connection having become natural and comfortable during the night. "Did you rest well?" Keith asked. "Yes," Lyra said. "Better than any restoration cycle since my arrival on Earth." She looked down at their joined hands. "Your energy is compatible in ways I did not anticipate." Keith wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but it sounded positive. "I'm glad," he said simply. Sunlight crept further into the room, a beam of light eventually falling across the bed, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air between them. In this golden light, the moment felt suspended, fragile, as if the regular world with all its rules and expectations was still held at bay for just a little longer. "You said you would leave at first light," Keith said, hating to break the spell, but feeling he should acknowledge her earlier statement. A shadow passed over Lyra's features. "Yes, I should not remain in one location for long. It increases risk of detection." "By whom?" Keith asked. "Are there people looking for you?" Lyra's expression grew guarded. "Possibly. Some humans would find my existence valuable for study, for technology." Keith understood immediately. Government agencies, scientists. The thought of Lyra being captured, studied, perhaps dissected, filled him with sudden dread. "But where will you go?" "I have identified several temporary shelters," Lyra said, though she didn't sound enthused by the prospect. "I have become adept at remaining undetected." Keith frowned, thinking of her hiding in abandoned buildings, alone and vulnerable in a world that would either fear or exploit her. The unfairness of it struck him deeply. What if? He began, then paused, surprised by the thought that had come to him. What if you stayed here, at least for a while? Lyra's eyes widened. "That would put you at risk as well. If I were discovered." "My apartment is private," Keith reasoned. "I don't have many visitors. You'd be safer here than in abandoned buildings, and you'd have, well, a bed, food, companionship." He smiled slightly. "And apparently my energy is compatible with yours, so that's a bonus." Lyra studied him intently, as if trying to read his motivations. "Why would you offer this to a being you just met?" Keith considered the question seriously. "Partly because it seems like the right thing to do. Partly because—" he hesitated, then decided on honesty, "because last night was the first time in years I felt truly connected to someone, even though that someone isn't even human. There's something reassuring about that. Something I don't want to lose just yet." Lyra's expression softened with understanding. Connection is a powerful force across all sentient species. She gently squeezed his hand. "Your offer is generous and unexpected. Is that a yes?" Keith asked, surprised by how much he wanted her to agree. "It would be unwise," Lyra said slowly. "Yet wisdom is sometimes outweighed by necessity, and by the value of genuine connection." She met his eyes directly. "Yes, I will stay, though we must be cautious." Relief, and joy washed through Keith in equal measure. "We'll be careful," he promised. "And if it ever becomes too risky, we'll figure something else out." Lyra nodded, a smile transforming her features. "This is not the outcome I anticipated when I knocked on your door." "Me neither," Keith laughed softly. "But I'm glad you did knock." Outside, the city was waking up, traffic sounds increasing, the distant wail of a siren, all the familiar noises of human civilization beginning another day, entirely unaware that something extraordinary had occurred in a modest apartment on an ordinary street. The world continued as it always had, but inside this room, everything had changed. Keith became aware that they were still holding hands and that he was still lying in bed with a being from another world. Under normal circumstances, this level of intimacy with someone he had just met would have made him uncomfortable. Yet with Lyra, it felt natural, as if some deeper recognition had bypassed the usual social formalities. "Are you hungry?" he asked, practical concerns beginning to surface. "I'm not sure what you eat, but I could make breakfast." "My nutritional needs are simpler than yours," Lyra explained. "Water and certain minerals are sufficient, though I can process some of your foods for the experience rather than necessity." "The experience?" Keith repeated, amused. "Sensory experiences are valued by my kind," Lyra said. "Taste is an interesting sense that functions differently for us than for humans." "Well then," Keith said, finally sitting up but still not releasing her hand, "let's get you some new sensory experiences for breakfast." As morning light filled the room completely, banishing the last shadows of night, Keith and Lyra remained connected, physically by their joined hands, but more profoundly by the simple miracle of finding understanding across an interstellar divide. In a universe vast beyond comprehension, two lonely souls had found each other, brought together by a gentle knock and a simple question. "May I sleep beside you tonight, human?" The answer had been yes, and in that affirmation, both had found something they hadn't known they were seeking. A reminder that compassion needs no common language, that connection can transcend difference, and that sometimes the most extraordinary encounters can happen on the most ordinary nights. As they finally rose to face the day together, Keith knew that regardless of what challenges lay ahead, and there would surely be many, this moment of perfect understanding would remain with him always, a testament to the truth that even in the vastness of space, no one is truly alone as long as kindness exists.